Sometimes in life you'll find yourself sitting in your room being a goblin about to finish a video game you've fallen in love with, and when the credits roll you sit there wallowing in sadness because it's over. Yeah, well that doesn't happen to me because like the straight genius I am, I always made sure I got another banger lined up to fill that void. I just got done doing a video on Hollow Knight, a masterpiece of a game, and although I was a little sad it was over, I saw something big and shiny on the horizon. Something I've been trying to get to. I guess the title of the video gives it away, but you guessed it, Armored Core 6. A game I've been really looking forward to playing, but just haven't gotten around to it. Before we dive in, I'm obviously a big FromSoft fan. I'm practically a Souls-like channel at this point. Not really. But going into Armored Core, I knew I wasn't going to get a Souls-like experience. However, I knew it was going to be an amazing one nonetheless because, I mean, it's FromSoft. I'll be the first to admit, I've never played an Armored Core game before. In fact, I've never even played a Met game besides like Titanfall. But I was still excited when they announced the game and started releasing trailers. I knew it was something I could get behind. I'm not sure why it took me so long to give it a shot. Better late than never, I guess, but spoilers, f***ing god tier game. Armored Core is even better than I was expecting. So as Handler Walter says,
got a job for you, 621.
Because today we're talking about Armored Core 6, baby. All right. When I first booted up the game, I was excited, but had zero expectations. I wasn't sure what I was signing myself up for, but my mind was open and I was ready for anything. Well, maybe I wasn't ready to die so many times to the tutorial boss, but it's all good. Immediately as soon as you land on Rubicon, you can feel how smooth the gameplay is. I was worried the game would play a little clunky, but it's far from it as long as you get the hang of the game's controls. It did take me a little bit to get used to the game's overall feel, but it was only because I was playing like dog shit, practically button mashing the entire time. And to be honest, I played like dog shit for the entirety of my first playthrough. And it was a little overwhelming at first, especially with the AC customization, but once everything clicked, it clicked. Anyways, after I finally realized I needed to be up close for the tutorial boss, I was able to get the W. Now, there's a ton I want to say about the game at this point. I've gotten all the endings, watched a 5-hour-long VOTI lore video, just beat AC4, moving on to 4 answer. So yeah, I got a problem at this point. So how did I end up like this? And if you want the fastest answer, Armored Core 6 is just that fucking good. And for someone who has never played an Armored Core game before, there's nothing, at least I can compare it to. There's a level of badassery here that made me not only feel good just by playing the game, but pulling off a close boss fight and trying out some wacky new builds just makes you want to openly shout, "That's what I'm talking about!" I know that's a weird way to describe the game, but that seriously was my entire experience in a nutshell. Like I was saying, the gameplay is seriously smooth like butter. Even if you decide to turn your AC into a giant death machine, it still feels amazing. But I'm getting ahead of myself per usual. Let's quickly talk about the game's story, because the story on the surface isn't anything too crazy, but if you really pay attention and get all the endings, you'll find that what you thought you understood is really only the tip of the iceberg. If you don't know, you play as this independent mercenary called 621, and you're here on Rubicon with your boy Walter to find this resource called Coral. Coral is this wacky energy resource. It can also be used for food through these little worm dudes. It can straight carry consciousness, and it'll make you trip if you take it. So yeah, obviously it's a pretty valuable resource, and depending on what ending you get, you'll be deciding what you do with the resource. Want to light this shit on fire and get the coolest named ending ever?
The Fires of Raven.
Or how about stopping all these corporate douchebags from stealing all that good? Or lastly, the secret true ending where you do some crazy ass shit and release the coral out into the universe. Yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the story because obviously it can get pretty complex. I'll let the pros handle the lore talk, but actually playing through the campaign is super fun and it all flows really well. One of my favorite things about Armored Core is actually how linear and short the story is. It doesn't take you too long to get your first ending, and each mission doesn't take usually longer than 10 minutes max. I don't really play super linear games often, though it was a really refreshing experience to play something that was short and sweet. And the beauty about the story is since there are 3 different endings, the replayability here is insane. Each ending branches out pretty hard, especially in the last chapter of the game. So when you start up in New Game Plus, not only will you have all your AC parts, but you'll be given new missions that weren't available to you before. I wasn't expecting how different each playthrough was going to be, especially when you come around to your third playthrough. And that third playthrough is actually really wild and plays almost completely completely different from the first two. It was really fucking cool to see the amount of new encounters or same encounters with a different twist. I was a little worried that my third playthrough was going to start feeling repetitive, but yeah, nah. So even though the game is a very short and linear experience with its mission-based gameplay, the fact that each playthrough feels so different makes it 100% worth playing again. It was really nice having multiple endings that actually played different instead of just getting a different cutscene at the end. And I can guarantee that most people immediately loaded into that first mission after beating the game for the first time. I also wasn't expecting there to be such memorable bosses as well. There are some bangers here. For me personally, Snailtius was my favorite. It took me so long to kill his ass, and when I finally beat him, the dopamine was immense.
Archibus.
Or finding Walter during the Liberation of Rubicon ending, bruh. The fact that this game makes you kill your homies, brutal, man. Alright, before we move on to the actual gameplay, I gotta say one more thing. The voice acting was superb. Amazing. Armored Core 6 has some of the best voice acting I've ever heard. Gun 1 Michigan of the Red Guns, the GOAT.
Gun 13, sound off.
But moving on to the aspect that has me hooked and going back to the older gen games, the gameplay and customization. What makes Armored Core Armored Core? Now, like I was saying earlier, the customization was really overwhelming for me at first. I didn't know what weapons to add and didn't even want to fuck with any of the body parts. So I kept using the basic shit that was given to me and only bought a few weapons to try out. But since you start out broke as shit, you can't afford anything too fancy anyways. But after completing some missions, making some money, and dying a lot, I finally started swapping out a bunch of parts. Sometimes I would make things worse and just die a lot faster. But the beauty about Armored Core 6 compared to the older games is that you can actually use the garage mid-mission. A lot of the time I would die in a boss fight, feel like maybe I was too slow or too squishy, so I'd swap a few things out and try again. I learned that Armored Core in a way is a lot about trial and error. Managing your AC is a big aspect of the game, but I'm telling you, there is nothing that compares to finally beating the mission you've been stuck on after finding the right build. If you've played the game before, you know the feeling. There are a ton of parts for you to buy and toy around with, and what's really nice, say you don't like a part you just spent $500,000 on, you can sell it back for full price, which made the entire experience of trying out new playstyles and parts a lot more rewarding. Due to how missions are designed, some builds will feel better to play in certain situations, but I never felt like I was being limited to one playstyle. I really enjoyed going with a fast melee setup, and this build worked really well when I needed to be more quick and agile. There were missions where I needed to take down a lot of enemies, and because my health was so low, I needed to be extremely careful or I would get obliterated. Definitely doable, but most of the time I would switch to my giant death machine and it'd be a cakewalk. Yeah, some of the balancing feels a little off in my opinion. Everything is viable for sure, but some of the weapons like the stun needle were broken if you landed your shots. So my weapon of mass destruction was kitted with 2 stun needles and 2 Zimmermans. This build could handle anything with ease. But even with the build that could handle anything, I still wanted to push myself and try other builds that seemed fun to me. Like, trust me, it can be fun to obliterate anything and everything, but after a while it gets a little stale. And that right there is the reason why I've fallen in love with this game. The amount of freedom with customization and then having so many different missions to test what you've been cooking up in the garage. It's what makes the gameplay loop so much fun. And then when you pair that with the game in general feeling really great to play with great mission design and insanely memorable boss fights, as a surprise to literally no one, FromSoft cooked up a banger with Armored Core 6. And I really can't get enough of it. Now I do gotta say, I haven't touched PvP. I'm way too scared to hop in there and mess around. I feel like at this point, it's probably only filled with Chads. Maybe I'll hop in there eventually, but for now, I've been emulating the older gen games. I just beat Armored Core 4, and it definitely feels and plays completely different from Armored Core 6, but the actual core gameplay is still there. I'm planning on moving on to For Answer next, and it seems like the Armored Core community thinks it's one of the best in the series, so I'm really stoked to get cracking on that. If anyone's an Armored Core veteran watching this video, feel free to recommend some of the titles that I need to play. I am thinking about jumping to the 3rd gen games next, but let me know in the comments. But to wrap things up, Armored Core 6 was an amazing experience through and through. It gave me a gameplay experience I've never had before, and I'm so happy that FromSoft has brought the series back. I can only imagine how the veterans are feeling. The gameplay is top notch, the customization is immense, and the lore and story was straight cinema. Some of the characters like Rusty or Michigan really shine, and some of the boss fights with Snailtius or All Mine will forever live rent-free in my my head. Definitely one of my favorite games I've played in a while, and that's saying a lot since I just got done playing Hollow Knight. My back catalog has been fire, dude. I'm really hoping that FromSoft is cooking up a sequel behind the scenes, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But anyways, I think it's a great place to call the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Better late than never with Armored Core, I guess. But anyways, I will see you guys in the next video, and yeah, peace.